Everybody, welcome and thank you for coming here tonight. You know that tonight is the exact 30th anniversary of the date that the West Seattle Bridge was fully open. Again, I'm Clay Eels. I'm Executive Director of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society, and I'm thrilled to have this panel here tonight. These people all love the bridge. That's why they're here, and they love West Seattle too. And could you please give them all a round of applause? We have former Seattle Mayor Charlie Royer. We have former Deputy Mayor Bob Royer. There are all these formers. How about former aide to Senator Warren Magnuson, Jerry Johnson? Former Port of Seattle Commissioner Jack Block. And there's no former about this next guy, Seattle City Council member Tom Rasmussen, who is a former aide to Seattle City Council member Jeanette Williams. And former engineers for the West Seattle Bridge Project, Bruce Wassell in the original t-shirt from Bridging the Gap 1984, as well as Tom Mahoney. And we saved the best for last. The journalists rarely get recognition here, and we have the editor of the West Seattle Herald back when the bridge story broke in the 1970s, Terry Finn. Now, I'm not going to talk very long here because I want to take us through the chronology, but I have to say a little bit. Number one, just to say that it is arguable, perhaps inarguable, that the West Seattle Bridge is the biggest thing ever to happen to West Seattle. It is part of our identity, it is our lifeline, it is really fundamental to how we connect with the outside world and how it connects with us. And so it's an occasion worthy of celebration. And really, more fundamentally, and the engineers can tell you this, that transportation is fundamental to our life. If you think about it, if we just stand static, we're not living, we're dead. But we're always moving, we're always going someplace. And our transportation systems are crucial to helping us live a better life, and they're also quite determinant of growth and all kinds of factors that play into the quality of life in the city. And so this is really a meaty topic. This isn't just a piece of concrete and rebar. And the story of this bridge in particular has its highs and lows. It's not just an ordinary story. It has scandal, it has, well, there's murder, and there's also lots of drama involved with this thing. And 30 years ago tonight was the first day that we were able to drive both ways over the bridge. So, I was going to first start this panel by having Phyllis Lamphere tell you a little bit about the mood of the 1970s in West Seattle before 1978, that crucial year. She couldn't be here tonight. She has a conflict. She has to moderate a Parks Forum, Proposition 1, down at Horizon House tonight, and she didn't realize she had double booked herself. She's missing the better one, I'll tell you that. But I was able to talk with her this morning a little bit, and she wants you to know that the era, in the years prior to 1978, when everybody thinks that's when, that was the trigger, that's what got our bridge. But there was a lot of political movement, there was a voter referendum, there was a lot of sentiment and a lot of work on the part of the city to get a new bridge for West Seattle. West Seattleites were demanding it, and the people who were involved with the industry on the Duwamish River were demanding it as well. And so she wants that aspect represented here. And had she not gone on to the federal government, I think in 1978, somebody once called her the best mayor Seattle never had, because she ran for mayor and she was about to do it again. Anyway, we had, and some of you, have you seen the video on our website of the 1973 of the low-level bridge going up for the boats? How many of you remember what it was like before the bridge? There are a few of you, yes. So this was, I mean, if you have to wait for the Ballard or Fremont or University or Montlake bridges, you had to wait for 2 bridges in West Seattle, and oftentimes a lot longer because these boats were not pleasure boats going up and down the Duwamish. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Bob Royer first, because he can describe this as well. Bob is somewhat of a historian on this topic. He's written about it. Can you tell us about West Seattle's mood in the 1970s with regard to a bridge?
Well, West Seattle had developed a mood going all the way back to like 1907, when its bridges across the then Duwamish were pretty harsh toward the authorities. In 1907 is when West Seattle merged with the city of Seattle, and it was during a period of time in which the census went from 80,000 people in 1900 to 240,000 people in 1910. A huge increase, most of it driven, there was some organic growth, but most of it was driven by annexations. In 1907 alone, West Seattle, Ballard, Ravenna, 7 or 8 towns merged with the city of Seattle at that time. And what they were looking for was benefit, of course. They wanted electricity, which Seattle had. They wanted water, which Seattle had lots of. And they wanted transportation, because they were on the other side of something, whatever it was, on the other side of a hill, on the other side of a water course, whatever it was, they wanted something. So so they had real high expectations that something was going to happen out of this. A lot of people in West Seattle did not like the 1907 merger. So, and at that time, in 1907, it was pretty poor transportation, and they could remember, a lot of people in West Seattle could remember that in 1888, a stern wheeler called the City of Seattle made a trip from Seattle to West Seattle, and it took just 8 minutes. And it's still a record. And as far back as 1916, West Seattle was clamoring not for any bridge, they wanted a high bridge. They didn't want to mess with all the stuff in the tide flats and all the boats coming in. They wanted a high bridge. So, and they didn't get that. In 1924, they got a lower level bascule bridge, and then 6 years later, in 1930, they got another low level bridge. And those bridges had issues. Yeah, those bridges really had some issues. For one of the bridges had water from the Cedar River attached to the bottom of the bridge. So when the bridge would go up, detach the water main, and then when it came back down, attach it once more. So that was kind of unacceptable. And then to save money, they on another bridge, the private trolley company didn't have the money to build their own bridge, which was the plan. So what happened was they made this Mickey Mouse little move where you came up from below the bridge, then you made this terrifying turn, and you could feel the trolley kind of weaving, and you're well above the water, and then you would merge on to the other bridge. Well, that was no good. And then Mayor Bertha Landis had some information that said we have to close the original trolley line because it had been so badly eaten by these insects that live in the water that it was unsafe. So what you had to do was stop the trolley, then walk across this rickety old bridge up this mean-spirited turn, and then go to the other side, and another trolley would pick you up. So you'd get pretty surly if that was the quality of your transportation. So it became a part of the West Seattle culture to be dissatisfied with the bridge. There's no question about it. So it wasn't surprising during Forward Thrust that Forward Thrust, looking what we can do for West Seattle, said, let's give them some money for a bridge. And so they gave West Seattle about $17 million, and West Seattle voted for Forward Thrust in a big way.
What year is Forward?
1968. So they had this money, but unfortunately, they also had some huge problems. Oh, and the city of Seattle also in 1968 put about the same amount into the pot. So they had about 34 million bucks in that year, in 1970, 71. And people were kind of thinking, hey, I can see myself going up that high-level guy, watching all those boats streaming below, pretty view of everything, and they were getting pumped, and they thought the bridge was here. But unfortunately, the city had hired a corrupt former engineer who worked closely with a corrupt chair of the Washington State House of Representatives Transportation Committee, and both those two people had decided it was in their interest to do business with a corrupt Baltimore engineering firm called Norley, Bender and Stone, which, by the way, at the same time we were choosing them to do the design for the bridge, they were being investigated in Chicago and Baltimore for acts that later became, or that were at the time criminal, but only later realized they were criminal. So in June of 1974, this is before the ship hit the span, but the other thing happened in June of 1974. The bids were opened, and the bids were almost twice the money that we had to do this bridge design. And the bridge design was only phase one, but it was going to be high, and you could get up there, and it was going to work great. So what happened? And then the question became, how in the world did this happen to us? We were there, and then it's all taken away. 2 years earlier, Bob Galino overruled the city's design commission and his own staff and the advice of lots of other people, and announced that this corrupt firm was going to get the contract. They had no experience in, at that time, a steel bridge design. They had none. But they did have experience in dealing with officials who were on the take, as Galino was. He not only took money, but he took favors from them. There was a woman at a New York meeting that became his as a result of an intervention by Norley, Bender and Stone. And Bob Perry, who was the head of this transportation committee, was asked to testify to grand jury, and he disappeared. So he went to Mexico, having been given a job at a nuclear plant by the lobbyists for Washington Water Power. Is this possible? What's going on here? So, and Perry, and the reason that Washington Water Power was interested in Perry was that Perry had a contact in Hong Kong who helped wash money, launder money, that came from rigged bids by Washington Water Power and a construction company. That money came back to the lobbyist for Washington Water Power for use in buying the legislature. It's a little bit like, remember President Reagan and remember President Reagan and the guns for, what was it, guns for? Yeah, Iran-Contra. So, you know, they gave guns, and anyway, it was a kickback so they could have money to use the way they wanted to use it. So anyway, it was a terrible situation. Then, we also learned that the lawyer for Norley, Bender, and Stone for their dealings out here was none other than Leonard A. Sawyer, who was the Speaker of the Washington State House of Representatives. But this is a big time, massive scandal, and I think we kind of forgotten it a little bit. But the good news of the scandal is that we did find out about it. The Municipal League, a guy named Bill Massey, who unfortunately is no longer with us, started an investigation. He smelled a rat right off the top, and he followed it, and we learned about what had happened to our dreams and our money with these corrupt officials. And then In addition to that, Shelby Skates, who worked for the Seattle PI, also a West Seattle guy for many, many years, he got a call from Bob Perry, who wanted to turn himself in. He went up to British Columbia, met Perry, Perry turned himself into Skates, but only so long as he could write it all down. And he wrote down this story from Bob Perry. Then they drove down, and he gave himself up to the district attorney. So it was a terrible, terrible setting, which throughout the bridge's history, getting built, it kept coming back. There's something dirty about this bridge, and it was difficult as a public official to be talking about this bridge because they're looking at you like you're corrupt too. West Seattle won the referendum on the bridge. Inflation, or the prime rate was 74. Well, I'm going to start with 1972 because that's what it says here.
And you wrote that.
Yeah. So in 1972, the prime rate was 4.5%. Today's prime rate's about 3.5%, and traditionally construction loans, that are loans taken out for the period of construction, are about prime plus 2.
Mic up.
Prime plus 2. Okay. So then in 1974, when voters approved the bridge, the prime rate was 9%. So it had doubled in 2 years. And then in 1975, it was 10%. So the construction loan for a 4-year construction period is going up now to about 12% interest rate. It was near 9% in 1978. In 1979, 11.5%. In 1980, 12%. The year we started construction, the prime rate in our market was 20%. So 22% interest for a big pot of money over 4 years. So every delay was critical to beat this inflation bugaboo that's in the room. So I think I'll just stop there. That's a nice place to stop.
I think the next question, and we're all waiting for it, is the night the ship hit the span. And one way we can take care of this and get all of the voices out one by one is to do that great t-shirt phrase, where were you on the night the ship hit the span? In other words, how did you hear about it? And I'm going to start down at this end, because I know Terry was there within a day, correct? And then we're going to lead up to what I know is a classic story that you have about that night.
Is this the right level? Again, Terry Finn, and I was the editor of the West Seattle Herald when the ship hit the span. That's the old T-shirt, the ship hit the span. So I was home in my actually my apartment in West Seattle, in the Admiral District, and I truly don't remember whether I got a call from someone. I think the bridge was hit between 2 and 3 a.m. in the morning, and it was a very sunny day the next morning. I remember I either heard it on the radio or else I got a call, and I can't actually remember what. I drove down to the bridge, and it was vacant. Of course, there was no traffic. I actually drove out onto the approach, and there was one guy, I think a Seattle Engineering Department guy, and a cop, a Seattle cop, standing out there. I said, well, what's it look like inside? And they said, well, it's pretty twisted. And so I actually climbed down a ladder and went inside the old bascule mechanism of the stuck open bridge and looked at all the twisted metal, the bent gears, and everything else, which was a terrifically stupid and unsafe thing to be doing. And then I went home and wrote a story. And West Seattle was a weekly newspaper, so I didn't have to write it real fast on deadline. But that was the kickoff, and that's where I was. Do you want to talk about?
Terry, no, hang on. I want to stick on you. Briefly tell what was going on 3 months before the succession movie.
Well, West Seattle, and Bob Royer's already explained a lot of these West Seattle character. I think, you can look back from the very earliest days. I think West Seattle first incorporated in 1902. It joined the larger city of Seattle in 1907. There's a famous story about Ferdinand Schmitz of Schmitz Park family going to the Seattle. Utilities here lagged. Even though we became part of the city, things like water, sewer, it was a big problem where to get the water supply into West Seattle. And water, sewer, and electrification were all huge issues in West Seattle in the early part of the last century. Ferdinand Schmitz went down to the city council in a famous case where he brought in a smoking kerosene lantern and smoked up the whole council chambers in order to plead for electrification in West Seattle. So in West Seattle, there's always been this feeling. It's obviously geographically isolated, especially in the old days. It's a peninsula. There's always been this feeling of separateness and to some degree isolation. And I have to confess, there's a little bit of paranoia there was in those days, because historically West Seattle's always felt mistreated or not adequately treated by the rest of Seattle. So even there were a lot of opponents against annexation in those days, and that really carried over through to the 40s and the 50s. There were a couple of different attempts at secession even earlier. And by 1978, earlier, before the ship hit the span, there was a big secession movement, and a guy named Dick Kennedy, a very well-known guy of Howden Kennedy Funeral Home here for years, very responsible community leader and a very nice guy. He became the chairman of the committee of secession, helped by people like Normie Beers, known as Mr. West Seattle in those days, Ken Wise of West Fuel, lots of the businesses here that I'm sure gentlemen along this table will remember. And they presumed upon County Councilman R.R. Bob Grieve to help draft this document of secession. And I was part of these meetings. Bob was funny. He used the secession document from an attempt by Martha's Vineyard to secede from the state of Massachusetts a few years earlier, and also the Confederate Rebellion document of secession. He uses his models for drafting these things. And it was never quite clear to me where a number of people were quite serious, but there was a lot of ambivalence about secession. And putting in my more practical political hat over the years, it's kind of strange because I've dealt with a lot of people at this table throughout a lot of long years. Some were dead serious about secession. Others felt it wasn't a very realistic option, but we're going to go ahead and push them anyway. And I think, I don't want to put, I'm sure Charlie Royer will talk about this later, and maybe Councilman Rasmussen, but I think one of the issues here was if we could actually force a vote, it was something the city didn't ever want to see happen. It wasn't the fact that it might succeed, it was the fact that even the pressure of a possible city vote on secession was something that no one in office really wanted to deal with. Councilwoman Lamphere was always a proponent of keeping the city whole and intact, and I have to say, many of us were like that too. We obviously didn't want to pull out of Seattle.
So why secession and the bridge? What did it have to